Sarah Martinez walked into the crowded community center with her head held high, even though her stomach churned with anxiety. The annual Veterans Day celebration was in full swing, and she had come to support her nephew's school presentation about local heroes. She never expected to become the center of unwanted attention. The trouble started when she bumped into her former co-worker, Janet Wilson, near the refreshment table. Janet's eyes lit up with malicious recognition, and her voice carried loudly across the room as she spoke. "Well, well, if it isn't Sarah Martinez," Janet announced, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "Everyone, meet the woman who claimed to be a military hero for 3 whole years at our company." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face as conversations around them began to quiet. People turned to look, their curious eyes making her feel exposed and vulnerable. She had hoped to keep her past private, but Janet seemed determined to drag it into the light. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said quietly, trying to move away from the growing crowd of onlookers. "Oh, come on," Janet continued, her voice getting louder. "You told everyone at Morrison Industries that you served overseas. You got promoted because of it. You got that veterans preference on the hiring. But when I called the military records office last year, guess what they told me?" Sarah's heart pounded as more people gathered around them. She could see parents from her nephew's school, local business owners, and even some actual veterans she recognized from around town. Their faces showed a mixture of curiosity and growing suspicion. "They told me there's no record of any Sarah Martinez serving in combat overseas," Janet declared triumphantly. "You're a fraud, a stolen valor case waiting to happen." The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. She saw people pulling out their phones, probably to record what was happening. Some shook their heads in disgust, while others whispered to their companions. "That's not true," Sarah managed to say, but her voice was barely above a whisper. The shame and anger were choking her, making it hard to speak clearly. "Then prove it," Janet challenged. "Show us your discharge papers. Tell us which unit you served with. What was your rank? Where were you stationed?" Sarah's hands trembled as she realized she couldn't answer those questions the way Janet expected. The truth was complicated, buried under layers of classified information and legal restrictions that prevented her from speaking freely about her service. Her assignments had been special operations, off the books, with documentation that didn't exist in normal military records. I can't," Sarah admitted, and the crowd's murmurs grew louder. "Of course you can't," Janet said with satisfaction. "Because you never served. You lied to get ahead, took opportunities away from real veterans, and now you're caught." An older man in a Veterans of Foreign Wars jacket stepped forward, his face stern. "That's a serious accusation, young lady," he said to Sarah. "Stolen valor is not just wrong, it's illegal. If what she's saying is true, you should be ashamed of yourself." Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had spent years learning to control her emotions, to bury her pain deep where no one could see it. But this public humiliation was breaking through all her carefully constructed defenses. "I didn't steal anything," she said, her voice stronger now despite the tremor. "My service was real. Just because it doesn't show up in the places you'd expect doesn't mean it didn't happen." "That's what every fake veteran says," Janet shot back. "Next you'll be telling us your records are classified or some nonsense like that." The crowd was getting restless. Sarah could hear people talking about calling the police, about exposing her story to the local news. Someone suggested contacting the Stolen Valor websites that specialized in outing fake military personnel. A young mother with a baby stroller pushed closer to get a better look. "I can't believe someone would lie about serving our country," she said loudly. "My husband did 2 tours in Afghanistan. How dare you disrespect what real soldiers go through?" Sarah wanted to explain that she understood better than most people what soldiers went through. that she had nightmares and scars that proved her service was real. But she couldn't say any of that without revealing information that could put other people's lives at risk. The crowd was getting uglier by the minute. Someone called out that they should take her picture and post it online. Another person suggested contacting the local veterans organizations to warn them about her. The humiliation was becoming unbearable. Sarah looked around desperately for an escape route. The community center felt like it was closing in on her, the faces of the crowd blending together into a sea of judgment and anger. She had survived torture and combat, but this public shaming was breaking her down in ways that physical pain never could. Just when she thought she couldn't take any more, the crowd near the entrance began to part. A group of men in military dress uniforms were entering the building, clearly there for the Veterans Day ceremony. Sarah recognized the bearing immediately, the way they moved with purpose and confidence. At the front of the group was a tall man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. His uniform was decorated with ribbons and insignia that spoke of distinguished service. As he approached the crowd gathered around Sarah, his eyes were scanning the situation with the tactical awareness of a professional soldier. Janet, emboldened by the audience and unaware of the approaching military personnel, continued her attack. "Look at her," she said, pointing at Sarah. "She can't even defend herself properly. A real veteran would have some pride, some evidence of their service." The man in the lead uniform was getting closer now, his attention clearly focused on the disturbance. Sarah caught his eye for just a moment, and something in his expression made her stand a little straighter. Maybe it was professional curiosity, or maybe he recognized something in her bearing that the civilians had missed. Commander Jack Thompson had seen enough conflict in his 25 years as a Navy SEAL to recognize when a situation was about to spiral out of control. The crowd gathered around the young woman near the refreshment table was growing more aggressive by the minute, and his instincts told him to intervene. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed. The crowd turned toward him, taking in his uniform and the decorations that marked him as a highly decorated special operations officer. Janet, feeling vindicated by the arrival of what she assumed was support for her position, stepped forward eagerly. "Commander, thank goodness you're here. This woman has been lying about her military service for years. She's been taking veterans' benefits and job preferences under false pretenses." Thompson's eyes moved to Sarah, who stood in the center of the crowd like a deer caught in headlights. But something about her posture caught his attention. Despite the obvious distress on her face, she held herself with a particular kind of stillness that he recognized. It was the way operators learned to stand when they were under pressure, a controlled readiness that came from training and experience. "Ma'am," he said to Sarah, his tone respectful but searching, "these are serious accusations. Do you have any documentation of your service?" Sarah's throat felt dry as she met the commander's eyes. Here was a real military officer, someone who would understand the weight of stolen valor accusations, but she also saw something in his expression that was different from the civilians around her. He was evaluating her, not just listening to gossip. "My service records are not available through normal channels," she said carefully. "I understand how that sounds, but it's the truth." Janet laughed harshly. "See? That's exactly what I told you. Every fake veteran has the same excuse. My records are classified. It's pathetic." Commander Thompson held up a hand for silence, and the crowd immediately quieted. He stepped closer to Sarah, studying her face with the analytical gaze of someone trained to read people under pressure. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked. "Sarah Martinez," she replied. "Look at me, Ms. Martinez," Thompson said quietly. His voice had dropped to a tone that only she could hear clearly. "I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to ask you, and I need you to answer honestly. Lives may have depended on your discretion, and they still might. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Sarah's eyes widened slightly. The way he phrased the question, the specific words he chose, told her that he might understand her situation better than she had dared to hope. "Yes, sir," she answered. "Were you part of a joint task force operating under Special Operations Command?" he asked, his voice still low. "I cannot confirm or deny specific operations or unit assignments," Sarah replied automatically, the words coming from years of training. Thompson nodded slowly. That response told him more than any documentation could have. No civilian would know to answer that way. It was the exact phrase used by personnel involved in classified operations. "Turn around," he said. Sarah hesitated. "Sir?" "I need to see your back," Thompson explained. "There's something I need to verify." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that something significant was happening. Janet looked confused but confident, assuming that whatever the commander was doing would prove her point. "This is ridiculous," Janet said. "What could you possibly see on her back that would prove anything?" Thompson ignored her, keeping his attention focused on Sarah. "Ms. Martinez, I understand this is uncomfortable, but I need you to lift your shirt slightly, just enough to see your upper spine area." Sarah's hands shook as she reached for the hem of her shirt. She had spent years hiding the tattoo on her back, knowing that it could identify her to the wrong people. But she also knew that it might be the only thing that could save her from this nightmare. She pulled her shirt up just enough to reveal her upper back, right below her neck. There, in small, precise black ink, was a tattoo that most people would assume was decorative. It looked like a simple compass rose with some geometric designs around it, but Commander Thompson recognized it immediately. His breath caught in his throat as he saw the specific design, the precise placement, the particular style that marked it as something far more significant than a decorative tattoo. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, too quiet for the crowd to hear. The tattoo was not random decoration. It was a marker, a permanent identification used by a very specific and highly classified unit. The compass rose was accurate down to the smallest detail, matching the design used by Task Force Sapphire, one of the most secretive joint operations units in the military. Thompson had worked with Sapphire operatives before, though he had never been part of the unit himself. He knew that the tattoo was earned, not given. It marked someone who had completed some of the most dangerous and sensitive missions the military had ever undertaken. The geometric designs around the compass indicated specific qualifications and mission completions that few people in the world would even know existed. More importantly, he knew that official records of Sapphire operatives were kept in a completely separate system, one that was not accessible through normal military record channels. To the outside world, these people had never served. Their sacrifices were invisible, their heroism unrecognized, their very existence denied for national security purposes. Sarah let her shirt fall back down and turned around to face him. She could see in his eyes that he understood what he had seen. The knowledge was almost a relief, even though it meant exposing herself to someone new. "How long?" Thompson asked quietly. 6 years active," Sarah replied. "Discharged 3 years ago." Thompson nodded slowly, processing the information. 6 years in Task Force Sapphire was almost unheard of. Most operatives lasted 2 years at most before the psychological toll became too much. The fact that she had served that long meant she had been exceptional at her job. The crowd was getting impatient. Janet stepped forward again, her voice sharp with irritation. "What is this about?" she demanded. "Some tattoo doesn't prove military service. Anyone can get a tattoo. This is just another attempt to avoid taking responsibility for her lies." Thompson turned to face the crowd, his expression serious. The weight of what he had just learned was settling on him, and he felt a growing anger at the treatment Sarah had received. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying across the room, "I need to inform you that you have made a serious mistake here today." The crowd murmured uncertainly. Janet's confident expression was beginning to falter as she saw the change in the commander's demeanor. "This woman's service record is not available through normal channels because her service was classified at the highest levels of government," Thompson continued. "What you see as a lack of evidence is actually evidence of service so sensitive that acknowledging it publicly could endanger national security." Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror. She was grateful to be defended, but she worried about how much he would reveal. "That's impossible," Janet sputtered. "She worked in accounting. She was a nobody. How could she have been in some secret military unit?" Thompson's eyes were cold as he looked at Janet. "Ma'am, the fact that you knew her in a civilian job and had no idea of her background is exactly the point. The best operatives are the ones who can blend in completely when they return to civilian life." The crowd was beginning to shift uncomfortably. The certainty they had felt in condemning Sarah was evaporating as they realized they might have been wrong. Some people were starting to back away, sensing that they had been part of something they didn't understand. Commander Thompson could see the doubt spreading through the crowd. But he also knew that Sarah needed more than just his word to clear her name completely. The damage done by public accusations required a public resolution. "Ms. Martinez," he said, turning back to Sarah, "I know you can't discuss specifics, but would you be comfortable if I shared some general information about your service record? Nothing classified, just enough to set the record straight." Sarah nodded, tears of relief finally starting to show in her eyes. "Yes, sir. Please." Thompson pulled out his phone and made a quick call. His voice was authoritative as he spoke to whoever answered. "This is Commander Thompson. I need you to run a verification on a former Sapphire operative, Sarah Martinez. I need confirmation of service dates and general mission count for public vindication purposes." The crowd watched in tense silence as Thompson waited for the information. Even Janet had stopped talking, though her face showed stubborn disbelief. After a few minutes, Thompson ended the call and looked at the gathered people with a serious expression. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've just received confirmation from the Special Operations Command Verification Office. Sarah Martinez served with distinction for 6 years in classified operations. During that time, she completed 47 missions in various locations that I cannot name. She was wounded twice in the line of duty and received several commendations that will never appear on any public record." The silence in the room was deafening. People who had been ready to condemn Sarah just minutes earlier now looked ashamed and confused. Some were staring at her with new respect, trying to reconcile the quiet woman they saw with the image of a special operations soldier. "But that's impossible," Janet said weakly. "She never acted like a soldier. She was quiet, kept to herself. She seemed so ordinary." Thompson's expression softened slightly as he looked at Sarah. "Ma'am, that's exactly how the best operatives are supposed to seem. The ability to blend into civilian life to appear completely normal is one of the most important skills they learn. Ms. Martinez wasn't failing to act like a soldier. She was succeeding at acting like a civilian." An elderly veteran in the crowd stepped forward, his VFW cap in his hands. "Miss, I owe you an apology. We all do. I served in Vietnam, and I know how hard it is to carry service that nobody understands. But what you did, serving in secret like that takes a special kind of courage." Sarah wiped her eyes, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in the crowd's attitude. "Thank you," she managed to say. "I never wanted recognition. I just wanted to serve and then live a normal life." "Why accounting?" asked a woman from the crowd, genuine curiosity replacing the earlier hostility. "After all that, why choose such a quiet job?" Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "After 6 years of chaos and danger, sitting at a desk working with numbers felt like paradise. Peace and quiet were all I wanted." Commander Thompson addressed the crowd again. "I want everyone here to understand something important. There are men and women who have served our country in ways that will never be publicly acknowledged. They don't get parades or medal ceremonies. They don't get to tell their stories or have their service recognized. They sacrifice not just their safety, but their right to recognition for our national security. He turned to look directly at Janet. Ma'am, what you did here today was not just wrong. It was dangerous. Operatives like Ms. Martinez maintain their cover identities even after leaving service, partly for their own protection and partly to protect others they worked with who may still be active. Exposing them publicly can put lives at risk. Janet's face had gone pale. I didn't know. I thought she was lying. At work, she got that promotion, and I thought it was unfair. Did it ever occur to you that maybe she earned that promotion? Thompson asked pointedly. That someone who had successfully completed special operations missions might actually be qualified for additional responsibility? The crowd began to disperse slowly, many people stopping to speak quietly to Sarah as they left. Some apologized directly, others simply nodded respectfully. The atmosphere had completely changed from hostile to reverent. A local news reporter who had been covering the Veterans Day event approached cautiously. Commander, would this be something you'd be willing to discuss on record? This seems like an important story about hidden veterans. Thompson shook his head firmly. Absolutely not. This was a private matter that needed to be resolved, but Ms. Martinez's privacy and security remained paramount. No interviews, no stories, no publicity. That's not negotiable. The reporter nodded and walked away, understanding the seriousness of the situation. As the crowd continued to thin, Sarah found herself standing with Commander Thompson and a few of his fellow officers. The weight of the day's events was beginning to settle on her. "How did you know?" she asked Thompson quietly. "How did you recognize the tattoo?" "I worked with your unit a few times," he replied. "Joint operations in places I can't name. I never saw you specifically, but I knew several Sapphire operatives. That tattoo design was briefed to us so we could identify friendly assets if needed." He paused, studying her face. "You should know that everyone I met from your unit spoke about their teammates with incredible respect. What you did mattered, even if the world will never know about it." Sarah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. For 3 years, she had lived with the constant fear that someone would challenge her service record, and she would have no way to defend herself. The isolation of carrying that burden alone had been almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have no idea what this means to me." "Actually, I think I do," Thompson replied. "I've seen what happens to operators when they can't talk about their service. The transition to civilian life is hard enough without having to hide who you were." One of the other officers, a younger SEAL with captain's bars, stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what was your specialty in Sapphire?" Sarah hesitated, then decided that among these men she could be honest. "Intelligence gathering and technical infiltration. I was the person they sent in when they needed information from places where a traditional soldier couldn't go." The captain whistled softly. "That explains the accounting job. You were always good with details and analysis." "Details save lives," Sarah said automatically, then smiled at her own response. "Sorry, old habits." Commander Thompson handed her a business card. "If you ever have problems like this again, call me. There are ways to verify your service without compromising security, but it requires someone with the right clearance levels to make the calls." As the Veterans Day ceremony continued in the background, Sarah realized that for the first time in 3 years, she felt like she could breathe freely. The secret she had carried alone was no longer completely hers to bear. Someone else understood. Someone else could vouch for her if needed. Janet approached hesitantly, her earlier confidence completely gone. "Sarah, I'm sorry, I had no idea. I thought I was doing the right thing. Exposing someone who was lying. I never imagined... Sarah looked at her former co-worker for a long moment before responding. Janet, I understand why you did it. From your perspective, the evidence looked clear. But maybe next time, consider that you might not have all the information before you try to destroy someone's life in public. Janet nodded, tears in her eyes. Is there anything I can do? Any way to make this right? Just leave me alone, Sarah said quietly. Let me go back to being invisible. That's all I ever wanted. As the day ended and people began heading home, Sarah stood in the parking lot of the community center, feeling like a different person than the one who had walked in hours earlier. She was still the same quiet accountant who preferred solitude and routine, but now she knew that if she ever needed to prove her worth again, she wouldn't have to face that battle completely alone. The tattoo on her spine, which had been a burden and a secret for so long, had finally served its true purpose. It had identified her to someone who understood its meaning, someone who could speak for her when she couldn't speak for herself. For the first time since leaving the service, Sarah Martinez felt truly free.